let's talk about Android UI. So basically, in Android, like I said, user interface is usually one of the things that you spend the most energy on. It's very important. There's a lot of it, and so on and so on. It's also the biggest difference between Java, plain old Java, and Android, right? So what you need to know about UI is that there are basically two ways to do it. You can do UI in a standard sort of way using Java, but or you can do it in using XML, right? So you can do basically the XML-based declarative approach, or you can do Java-based procedural approach, where you write Java code. What's the best way? Well, the best way is actually to use both approaches. So you start here first, right? And then you finish off here second. That's the best approach, right? So we're basically going to go from here to here. Okay. So what does that really mean? So let me give you an example. So if you are, for example, designing a button, right? XML is actually a really good tool to describe that button. Is the button large? Is it blue? Does it have rounded corners? Right? I mean, XML has tools where you can like drag and drop, resize, do everything kind of like what you see is what you get. Right? So that's with that's what XML is much better at. Now, what happens when a button is clicked? XML is not that good at. Right, that's where Java is much better. What happens when you click on the button? Okay. So that's kind of how we do it. We do first we start in XML in Java, then in XML, then we wrap it up in Java. So far so good. Yes. Does XML get converted to Java? Yes, ultimately it will. Cool. So let's create something that we can actually experiment with this a little bit. So let's start this Yamba project. So let's create a new project. You guys can do this along. We got to give you something to do, some typing, otherwise I know it's late in the day. So so let's do this. You can clean up your previous stuff. We're not going to need it. So let's do a file, new, Android project. Right, and then choose. We're gonna create a project called Yamba, right? So I'm gonna say Yamba. Okay. So now we're gonna pick the. So I'm gonna go next. Just like before, I'm gonna shoot for 4. Android 4.0. Ice cream sandwich. But I'm gonna say it works in as old as 10, for instance. For packaging, pick whatever you want. I'm gonna say com example Yamba. Now, are we going to create an activity? Sure, we can create an activity. I wouldn't call it Yamba activity. I would call it status activity. Because this is going to be our status activity, the first one. So basically what we're doing is roughly this iteration. So creating this guy first. So far so good. Does anybody have any constraints about versions of Android you guys are using? I asked it before, but maybe because like, oh, we have to, we're stuck on. Oh, okay.
I would first allow the
10 as back as 10. Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, in the way, like where I'm at, it's like everyone's got that access to it. So whatever phone you're at, you got people who that phone and new phone.
Yeah. Can get you could also get people with crappy phones in your phones.
Like, dealers and
Or not.
cars that have, we have to be able to make everyone happy.
And in general, when we're developing for the classrooms are going to be generally way behind on technology, so you have to be ready to target cheaper platforms.
But are you gonna be doing stuff on tablets or not? Or is what form
No,
factor?
that's the thing. In the longer term, I'd like to target tablets, but probably early on, what we'll be doing is trying to source phones that people are throwing away, essentially. So like have entire network phones to use in the classroom for educational applications. We end up doing like that sometimes for research projects.
Got it. Okay.
But yeah, the idea of I would like to be developing tablet apps down the road.
Got it. Okay. So so this is our Java project. So I'm gonna click on okay, and it makes sense to to shoot back as far as back as 10 because 10 is 50% of the market. It's a huge chunk of market, right? So you should at least be targeting that. Yeah. 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 So there's my Yamba. There's my Java in it, and then there's my resource layout main. Now, this name main may not make sense in this case, okay? Because what's so main about this layout versus some other layout? As a matter of fact, timeline is going to be more main than status activity. Okay, so I actually don't like this name too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. So refactor rename. So right click and then refactor rename. And I'm going to call it status.xml to correspond to status activity. Now that's going to break your status activity. Why? Okay, so it breaks it because you do not have our layout main anymore. You have our layout status. Remember how I said something is watching your resources all the time? Okay. So you can go to main, you can delete it, press button, just wait for all the options, and status should be there. If it's not, then there's another problem. So far so good. Okay. So what we're gonna do next is, so we just fixed it. We really didn't do anything in the Java file. Usually, like I said, we usually start with the XML file. Okay. So this is the XML file, the way it looks like right now. Now, what you're seeing is sort of the WYSIWYG UI for developing the application. So one thing that I would do in here is I would open up the sidebar, the outline, so you can see the outline of it. And one thing that's kind of interesting is also the properties that you get for each of these UI elements. So here's what I would do. We're currently missing the properties window. Okay. Now, whenever you're missing a window, easy way to get a window is to go under Windows, Show View, and find Properties. If you're still missing it, which we will likely will, go under Other, and then under General, find Properties. So I personally don't like properties being, I guess by default it opens it up here, right? Something like that. I don't like it down there. I like it more on the side, so I tend to put my properties here as part of, right next to the outline. And then adjust the width of properties and values. Now, let's take a look at this really quickly. What we have here is we have some boilerplate UI that has a linear layout and then it has a piece of text inside of it, also known as a text view, right? You can actually click on the status XML down here, okay, and you can actually see the XML version of this. So there's our linear layout, and then there's our piece of text in there, right? So this is just the actual text, the actual code. This would be the XML version. Now let's take a look at this. What does this really mean? So basically what we are saying is that we have one layout containing a piece of text, okay? So in Android, the UI works sort of like this. We have so-called composite pattern here. We basically have the container component model. How many of you did AWT or Swing work? Couple of you. Okay, so you know how in AWT and Swing we have a component, container and component model, right? So we have, like for example, you have panel, and panel can contain buttons, right? And panel is called a container, and button would be a component, right? Now, a panel can contain other panels because a container is a component. Right? That's a composite, right? You can compose them. So in Android, it's very much the same, except we call them slightly differently. So containers are layouts, and components are called views, but sometimes they're also called widgets. That's why it kind of gets confusing. And where it's also different than Java, regular Java, is that in regular Java, we your container had a layout. In Android, the container is a layout. It's not a has a, but it's a is a relationship. It's a subclass as opposed to a property. Yeah, that's a slight difference, but other than that, it's all the same conceptually. Okay. So layouts contain other components. So that's basically what we have here. So we have linear layout containing this piece of text, text view. Text view is like a label or a JLabel, right? So what happens when we run this? And by the way, you can click on run anytime. It's not really going to do much. It's just going to run the hello world for you, right? But what? Oh, see how now I have two devices and it's asking which device we want to run. Remember we talked about that? Yes, yeah, I'm able to. So the question is, what is the what does this code do? Remember how I said we are basically subclassing. First of all, I said Java is the top dog, right? Java is what runs at the end of the day, right? Secondly, I said what we're doing here is we are basically creating a taking activity, subclassing it, and then overriding a method called onCreate, right? The very first method that gets executed. And then we're calling the super in that method, right? No big deal. Okay. Then we are doing all the meaningful work in this line 11, right? And what I said earlier was that this line 11 simply points to this file, takes its content, puts it here, and inflates it. Okay. So what that's really going to do is going to go to this file, parse it, right? For each of these elements, it's going to create a Java object. Right? So one Java object, second Java object. And for each Java object, it's going to set these properties. So at the end of the day, what we are doing here is we are basically doing, the same, like 20 some lines of Java code, right? That's what this is going to evolve into. Make sense? So back to the graphical layout. Okay. So we want to create a screen that's going to look similar to this one. Hold on, let's see. So status update. So you want a screen like this. How many components do you guys see on the screen? Or views, to be more precise. Okay, so name them.
The status update, then the big status update, please enter your home for the status and the update button.
Okay. So, alright, so it depends on how you count, right? So you guys are counting this, so you're saying this, 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 and this, right? And this, okay. Yeah, so except this in itself is not a component, but this is. Okay? So we have the container that contains the whole thing, then within that we have some stuff, right? Well, we're going to keep this simple. We're going to start by having the big container, which we must have, and then we're going to create a piece of text, the field to enter something, and then we're going to get the update button. Like just these three things. We're not going to deal with the label until later, the counter. So far so good. So I'm going to delete what I got here. So select it and delete it. So now I have a pretty empty screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, for now, just dump the components that we need. So what are the components that we're going to need on this canvas? Yeah, you can take you can take this piece of text, form widgets, and you can say large. I'm going to take that large text there. Okay, that's going to be my title. What's the next one? Yeah, if you follow this directly, the text box would go be the next one. But I actually suggest the button to be the next one, because the button it's easier when the button is above than below because of the way keyboard works, the way keyboard comes up. So actually, the better UI design is if the button is at the top. So I'm going to take a button next. So not this button, but this button. Put a button there. Okay. So far so good. And the next one that I'm going to do is I'm going to find the text that's on the text field. I'm going to take this lorem ipsum and put it there. So far so good. Alright, so we now have all our three components that we care about. You can actually kind of see them right here. You can say that we have a linear layout. Oops, we have a linear layout with text view, button, and edit text. Right? So what I would do next, I would kind of do this in iterations. What I would do next is I would basically adjust the size of these components. Right? When it comes to size, you have a couple of ways to do this. But basically, each component should have the width and height. Okay? And one simple way to manage the width and height is via these two buttons. This is sort of new, it wasn't there before, but you can specify the width and the height. Okay? Now, this is only going to allow you to put the width to be either as small as the text inside of it or as big as space is available. Okay? So, this button here, this text field, the width is as big as it's available. We call that match parent. So matches the parent's width. Right? Sometimes it's called fill parent, but that's just an old name. They changed that to match parent, but they're basically fill parent and match parent are the same thing. Okay. The second one, this way up here, the vertical is called basically wrap content because it's only as big as its own content. And the fact that they have certain font expected there, that's why it's that big. Now, if I wanted to make this text box really big, I would press this button here, and I would make it big. So far, so good. So that's basically one way. Similarly, if I click on this button, if I wanted to make it wide, I would do that. Got it? So I'm just using those two buttons, that's it. In this text, what I probably want to do with this text is I would want to align it. Right? So you could press on this little thing here and you could try to align it to center. And that worked. Woohoo! So I selected this, last thing I did is I selected that and I picked the alignment. Okay, so that's basically what it is. So you know, I can save this. So make sure you save it, right? And then I can run it, and this should now be running as that application. By the way, this approach that we did of writing things designing it the way we did, it should look good even on this screen, on portrait screen. So I'm now running on portrait screen, and you can see that the actual thing is adjusting its width and height to match what's available, right? So that's why my button is still filling the parent or matching the parent, and it's still wrapping the content. So it's not like, you know, it's not just like in the top left corner of your big screen, right? So if I deployed this app on that Google TV there, it would actually be that big and everything. I mean, it would take all the available space and look proper for the most part. Make sense? So that's basically what, just kind of like in a nutshell, what the UI is. We just started basically with this. I know it's sort of toward the end of the day. Did you guys get this to work so far? Okay, cool. Okay, so tomorrow we're gonna continue with the UI. So we're gonna basically work on this to make it pretty and explain a whole bunch of things related to UI, how that works.